Order. Good afternoon and welcome to the Transport Select Committee. Could we have your names and positions, please, for our formal records?
Yes, I'm Robert Goodwill, the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State at the Department for Transport and the Aviation Minister.
Right, thank you.
I'm Benjamin Smith. I'm the Deputy Director for Aviation Policy and Delivery at the Department for Transport.
Thank you. And Minister, I understand you want to make a statement.
Just very briefly, could I welcome the fact that the committee are carrying out this particular inquiry and producing a report. I think with much of the coverage of airports in this country is focused on the southeast and what the Davis Commission may come up with a solution to that particular problem. But I think it needs to be recognised that we do very much value the role of what I'd like to call our regional international airports, not least because I represent a constituency in the north of the country. So we're very pleased indeed that you're conducting this particular committee at the moment. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. The UK does have a relatively large number of smaller airports in quite a relatively small area. Do you think that means there's a problem about the survival of individual airports? It's not just small airports, it's all airports, in fact.
Well, it is true that per head of the population we do have more airports, but airports do work in an intensely competitive environment, and it's about providing choice. So actually I'm very comfortable with the fact that we do have a large number of airports. And indeed, we have a very vibrant aviation industry. Since the recession, we've seen big increases in passenger numbers. We were the place where low-cost airlines started, and I think having airports in which they could operate was part of that particular process. So whilst I think there will be competition and we will see people doing very well, I mean, Southend, for example, have done phenomenally well. Other airports have done less well, but I think as we live in a vibrant, competitive environment, not an environment like in many parts of Europe where local authorities control their airports, I think we're in a good place, and I'm actually very comfortable with the fact that we have a large number of airports. And as I go around the country, I've visited a number of airports. I've been to Leeds Bradford, I've been to Doncaster, I've been to down to Newquay, I've been to Biggin Hill, one of the smaller airports. I've been to a lot of airports, and everywhere I go I get a very positive and upbeat story about how they've got plans to invest, how they have plans for better connectivity, and how they see a real viable future for them in the vast majority of cases as I go around the country.
What projections has the Department made about expansion, passenger growth in smaller airports?
Well, I think it depends very much which airport you're looking at and what the competitive environment is that they're in. And certainly if you look at airports close to Manchester Airport, they do feel their big brother breathing down their neck. In other areas like Newcastle Airport, where they've been doing particularly well, they don't have a very close competitor to actually breathe down their neck in the same way. I think it's also interesting that airports that have connections through to some of the hub airports in the southeast are particularly keen to develop, and I think that's one of the things that's been holding back some airports, the lack of connectivity through to Heathrow and Gatwick. But then on the other hand, we've seen KLM step up to the mark, and some of the other airlines on the continent to an extent sort of taking advantage of the APD distortions in the market, and therefore shipping people across to Schiphol, Charles de Gaulle or Brussels. So some of the regional airports that don't have that benefit of getting through to Heathrow or Gatwick do have those alternatives, which of course, for example, Manston did have a KLM flight, which meant people could fly to almost anywhere in the world via that big international hub.
Do you see small airports as strategic assets that the state should intervene to support if they're struggling?
I think they're strategic assets from a business point of view. It's looking at my own constituency, which is about as far away from airport as you can get, but they see very much the advantage of being able to fly in their customers and their investors or people who are seeking to seek employment in particularly specialist areas into an airport which is close to them. And certainly if you're in the northwest or the northeast, you don't see Heathrow as being a particularly good location to bring people in. So I think from a business point of view, that is very important indeed. And our local enterprise partnerships recognise that. And indeed, many of them are backing bids for better surface connectivity, whether that be rail or road or improved bus services, to enable their airports to actually be more accessible, not only to the people who maybe want to go on holiday or through friends and family, but as important business activity that is based at those airports.
We've heard during our inquiry that smaller airports have suffered much more than the larger ones since the recession. What do you think the reason for that could be?
A lot of it, I think, is some of the tour operators and the airlines themselves have had to cut back, and therefore they've looked at maybe the routes where they don't have the same high level of passenger numbers, and therefore that has had an effect on some of those. Of course, conversely, some airlines, such as Flybe, for example, have sold slots at Gatwick and used that money to invest in putting on additional services to some smaller regional airports. So there's been an upside as well as a downside. But by and large, as I go around the country, I get a very upbeat position from the very many airports that I go to. And certainly they're all looking to invest in the future, looking at putting in new car parking facilities, hotels are being built. Newcastle, for example, where I was beginning of last year, I think, they're looking at expanding the business opportunity, not only for aviation-related business, but also for businesses that just want to be at the airport because they've got access to facilities at the airport, they've got conference facilities, they've got the ability to get people in and out quickly. So I generally get a very upbeat and positive message around the country from those airports, which, if you look at the figures, are seeing their passenger numbers grow. And certainly recovering very strongly since those dark days of the recession.
Mr Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, John. Can I move on to APD? Because
yes,
the Minister did
yes.
Mention that in his first answer. Minister, can you just give us an assessment of where you think APD is? Because you did say that it was having an impact of some people moving to the continent to try to avoid it. The airlines and airports are saying because it's a departure tax for internal flights, it's a double hit for passengers. And there was a statement, the autumn statement, where we had the comment about child APD being alleviated. Can you just give us an assessment where you think APD is? And I want to move on in a minute to it being devolved to Scotland and Scotland saying that they're going to abolish it, which you might want to incorporate into your answer. I'm just keen to see where the department is, especially given it's a Treasury issue, but obviously the Department for Transport have a very keen interest in trying to help the Treasury make the right decisions here.
I think if the Chancellor of the Exchequer or one of the other Treasury Ministers were sat here, they would first of all need to make the point that the revenue from APD is a very important part of our wish to reduce the deficit and get the public finances back into some semblance of order. And it is indeed a tax which is collected, some of it from foreigners. So that's also, from a political point of view, probably a less unpopular tax than others. It is, of course, in many people's view, a distortion of the market. Any tax is a distortion of the market. And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that if I fly from Newcastle to the USA via Schiphol, I will be paying less APD than if I fly Newcastle via Heathrow. And I think that's one of the distortions in the market that some regional airports are benefiting from to an extent, because they are able to fly people to Charles de Gaulle, Schiphol or Brussels in order for them to take their onward journey. So it is a distortion of the market, and I don't think anyone could argue against that. I think the Treasury have obviously reacted to that by simplifying the banding, so we now no longer have this rather bizarre situation that you paid less APD to fly to some Caribbean destinations than to Hawaii, because the APD banding was based on the location of the capital city, not the distance that was actually flown. And we've seen more help given, which will start on the 1st of April, where children under the age of 15, is it, will be not paying APD, and then a year later that will be reduced to 12. I think that's been a recognition of the impact that APD can have on families, particularly as we're very keen for them not to go on holiday during the term time when flights are cheaper. So I think the Treasury does recognise this is quite a politically charged issue. And indeed, I think there's been campaigns by airlines themselves to encourage their passengers to make representations to their MP. And I know some of my colleagues have been a little bit irritated that all the charges, including airport charges and fuel charges and everything else, have been so portrayed as a government red tape burden put on the industry. But the fact remains is, APD is a tax that does raise revenue for the Exchequer. It is part of our long-term economic plan, and I'm sure the Chancellor will keep it under review.
And the devolving of the raising of the tax to Edinburgh and the impact on airports in the north of England?
Well, obviously, we're at the start of a process in terms of the devolution. It's not something that's going to happen next week, but as that process continues, it seems likely that we should give some thought to what would happen if we had different levels of APD in Scotland and or Wales. And I know it's of particular concern to our friends at Newcastle Airport and Bristol Airport, where they have the possibility of not only passengers travelling from another airport not so very far away, but airlines themselves switching. I think that would have a major impact. I've seen some figures that it could be as much as 25% at some airports, but that was, I think, assuming that the devolved administrations would use the maximum flexibility available to them to abolish APD. It may be that may not be as far as they would go, but it's certainly some concern. And the measures that we could put in place to address that are actually very much constrained by EU competition law. The committee may recall some time ago that the UK looked at actually abolishing APD on return domestic flights, and that was ruled to be not within the flexibilities that EU law would allow. And therefore there is limited scope on what we could do to address that particular issue, other than, of course, the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself cutting APD in England as well to engage in tax competition. So, but I think you probably have to get the Chancellor or Mr Gork along to give evidence along those lines. I wouldn't dare encroach upon the issues that the Treasury themselves are in charge of. But we have been looking at the impacts it would have and what mitigation could be put in place. But we are pretty much limited by EU competition rules in terms of England. We don't have a regional federal structure in England. We don't have tax-raising powers for the North East or the North West or wherever. So that's not something that would actually allow the North East to reciprocate in terms of cutting their taxes.
So given that the airports that you mentioned in respect of any devolved powers to Edinburgh or to Cardiff were the smaller airports, your assessment is that any change to APD in the devolved assemblies will have a bigger impact on smaller airports than it will do on the larger airports?
It would certainly have an impact on airports that were geographically close. And the two that would spring to mind would be Bristol, which I don't think is a small airport under the terms of this particular remit, but certainly Newcastle Airport. And I think the impact would be more severe were airlines themselves to move their operating point rather than maybe looking at passengers moving. Certainly from Newcastle, Edinburgh situation, if you actually live in the North East in Newcastle, it's a long way to go to Edinburgh, and it's unlikely the APD would be sufficient. But on some of the profit margins that some of the low-cost carriers are operating on, £13 is an attractive amount of money for them to consider relocating their operation.
Thank you, Chair.
Belfast International Airport are concerned about the impact of air passenger duty on their growth because airports in the Republic don't have APD. Do you share that concern?
I thought we devolved APD to...
Only for the transatlantic.
Only for the transatlantics. Yeah, I mean, they would have a similar effect if the Republic were engaged in the same sort of competition that we've seen. As my colleague Mr Smith just pointed out, the transatlantic flights don't pay APD, and therefore if Northern Ireland were themselves to look at devolved powers, that's something they may want to address. But certainly when you set up a system where you have tax competition, the evidence around the world is that tends to force taxes down. The same would apply to corporation tax, where the Republic of Ireland have very competitive rates and Northern Ireland are affected by that. So, by and large, I see tax competition as a positive thing, so long as the people who are affected by that are able to respond by also addressing their tax levels. But as I say, this is a matter that the Treasury will be considering, I'm sure, continuously to ensure that any distortions are addressed within the whole tax system.
Yeah, I'm sure the department have an influence on that. It's transport policy.
Were it to be the case that we had such an influence on the Treasury, but we certainly have negotiations and discussions with them.
Mr. Stringer.
I'd like to ask some questions about Manston, if I may, but just while we're on APD, you're aware, are you, Minister, that the airports had a study done by consultants? I think it was Ernst & Young, but it may have been another one of the consultants that showed that if APD was abolished in this country, that the benefits elsewhere in the economy would more than compensate for that loss. Are you aware of that report?
Yes, I've seen those figures, and obviously the Treasury take those into account. I mean, similar arguments have been made about cutting corporation tax and cutting income tax. You may recall, Mr. Stringer, that... Yeah.
I just wanted to know if you were aware of it. You clearly are.
Yes.
Do you make, as a Minister in the Department of Transport responsible for aviation, do you make representations to the Treasury along the lines of that report?
Well, certainly I've had a number of conversations with Treasury ministers, not least because I get lots of mail in from colleagues complaining about APD. I engage with airports who themselves complain about APD. So, it's always the first item on the agenda when I meet with the airport operators or the airlines. And I always give them the same answer, well, this is a Treasury matter, but we then go on to discuss it, and I will feed those discussions into the Treasury, so that they're aware that this is a politically charged tax, one which I think many political parties want to talk about. And it is the case in case of many taxes, in terms of top rate of income tax. Just because you put a tax up doesn't mean you're going to get more money back from it. And
Well,
I'm sure
it's not just politically sensitive, it might be counterproductive, and it might actually raise less tax than if you didn't have the tax. Do you think, I take it from your answers, I interpret your answers, you can tell me if I'm wrong, that you are making representations to the Treasury to reduce or lower this tax. Do you think we can expect any change in the near future?
I think it's probably a case of watch this space, but we must also need to bear in mind that it's a non-regressive tax, and that the people who by and large pay it are not the poorest in our society, unlike VAT on chocolate biscuits, for example, which is paid by the very poorest, and therefore if APD were to be cut, it may mean that other taxes which are more distortive and regressive might be increased elsewhere. So, I get lots of people coming to me with all sorts of suggestions how we can cut tax. I rarely get people coming to me with good suggestions where we can increase tax. Indeed, look what happened when we started sort of going into the area of pasties and caravans. It would seem pretty low-hanging fruit and easy to operate, but when you start looking at areas of tax to increase, you often find there are unforeseen side effects and implications.
Yeah, we're in favour of progressive taxes and not in favour of taxes that reduce the tax intake. Can I move on to Manston? What discussions have you had about Manston, either with the owners or with Kent County Council or the local council? What discussions have you had?
I've spoken twice on the telephone with Mrs. Gloag. One of those was actually in the vestibule of a train at Birmingham New Street Station, so it wasn't a very audible conversation on either side. I've spoken at length with Iris Johnston, the leader of Thanet Council, during the time they were looking towards the compulsory purchase. I've had a meeting with River Oak, the investors who were keen to come in and rescue the airport, if that's the right word to use, in my office with Sir Roger Gale, who accompanied them. And I had a number of conversations with Sir Roger and with Laura Sands, with Craig McKinley, who is our parliamentary candidate down there, to see what can be done. So I've had a lot of conversations about it, and I indeed had a meeting this morning with Mr Hayes, the Minister of State, who went down to Manston in December and continues to take a keen interest on behalf of the Prime Minister, who also takes a very keen interest on the future of Manston.
What's the objective? What's your objective, the department's objective in these discussions?
I think to do everything we can to facilitate a rescue deal so that aviation can continue at Manston, if that be possible, to ensure that, for example, were aviation to be restored to Manston, that the Civil Aviation Authority would do everything in their power to ensure that things were, that the regulation and the licensing was facilitated quickly and efficiently, so that there could be no problems in that regard. I think that we need to make sure we explore all possible avenues. The paperwork that Thanet Council looked at before they rejected the compulsory purchase is now in the department, and we're looking to see what we can do with that. I've not reviewed it myself, but certainly we need to explore what can be done in the future, because I think what has been absolutely apparent, unlike many airports around the country where we get more letters complaining about the noise than we do get representations keen to support the economic activity at the airport, Manston has a tremendous degree of support in the local community. They wish to see those jobs retained. They wish to see aviation continue there. And I know that the potential investor does have some plans which would allow some development of freight operations, particularly niche freight operations, and of course the recycling of aircraft on the site. So we're very keen to do everything we can to ensure that everything that can be done will be done to facilitate the possible restoration of operations at Manston. I think it's also interesting to note that some of the scare stories that have been going round about the radar not being there anymore and that some of the equipment not being there, I am assured that the radar is there. Indeed, it seems to be some confusion who owns the radar, whether it be the Ministry of Defence or whether it be the company that owns the airport. So in that case, it seems unlikely that anyone will be able to sell the radar in the short term. The landing lights are still installed. I think some of the firefighting equipment has been sold, but that's not something that would be difficult to restore. Some of the passenger equipment in the airport itself has been sold off, but initially I think that the plan that River Oak were coming forward with was not initially for a passenger operation, so that wouldn't be a block. But we are, as I say, keen to leave no stone unturned to facilitate any rescue that could take place.
I mean, this is an unhappy story, so you want aviation to continue there. Do you think you've had enough powers, or you have enough powers, to be able to intervene in a situation like this?
I don't think the United Kingdom government, unlike maybe the Scottish government or the Welsh government, are in the position of wanting to sort of intervene directly to take over operations of an airport in this way. We operate in a commercial environment.
That wasn't quite the question I asked. Do you think you've got enough powers if you wanted to intervene?
Yes, I think we have the powers that we need, for example, to work with the CAA. I mean, one of the barriers that was mooted as being a reason why aviation couldn't recommence is, the CAA will never issue a licence. Well, we can work with the CAA, they're an independent organisation, but we can work with them to make sure that any artificial barriers that would in place of licensing of that operation would not cause that to be a problem. I think it is very important indeed that we explore all avenues that we can and ensure that whatever powers we have in terms of the government can be used to their fullest effect. But at the end of the day, this is a commercial airport. We have a commercial investor who is exploring the possibilities of restoring operations there, and there is a mechanism in place which currently the Thanet Council have rejected, the compulsory purchase and transfer. And I think the ball is still in play, and we certainly want don't want to do anything to sort of blow the whistle on final time, because I think there is still adequate opportunities to try and explore further ways in which we can ensure that something can be done to save the operations in an airport which has tremendous support from the local community. And I think we should recognise that in stepping up to the mark to ensure that the department, that the local authorities involved themselves can do what they can to try and alleviate the situation.
Manston Airport is clearly a commercial operation. Sir Roger, when he was here before us a fortnight ago, I think it was, suggested that Manston Airport should be seen as a strategic asset. Do you see it as a strategic asset?
Well, it's obviously it's a very large and wide runway. Certainly, it has been suggested by Sir Roger that it would be a good diversionary destination. Obviously, for that to happen, you'd have to have the emergency services there at full strength to ensure that if any plane was sent there. Currently, we don't use Manston as a diversionary airport. Whilst Manston's runway is 9,000 feet long, other southeast airports do have longer runways. Gatwick, for example, is 10,900 feet long, and Heathrow over 12,000 feet. But it would depend on the availability of suitably trained air traffic controllers, emergency services and expert technical support at the destination for it to be used in that way.
Just if I can go back a couple of answers. You said you'd got the powers that were necessary, but it was a commercial organisation. However, it might also have strategic importance. Does that mean that you have chosen not to use powers that could have kept Stansted open?
I mean, I think it would have been a mistake for the government to have acted in the way that the Scottish government did with Prestwick. And,
yeah. But did you choose not to? That's the question I'm asking.
I think that decision was never on the agenda.
You said previously it could have been, that you had the powers. That's what I understood you to say. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm saying, therefore, did you choose not to keep it open?
The decision.
At what point did you decide
there was never,
you were going to try and use powers which you haven't specified terribly clearly to restore Manston to being operational?
There was never a point at which Her Majesty's government even considered purchasing Manston Airport and setting up operations there. It was always a case that we would work with the local authority, with Thanet Council, who themselves were engaged with the compulsory purchase process. I think they were disappointed. When I spoke to Councillor Iris Johnston, she made it clear she was disappointed that Kent County Council themselves didn't recognise the regional importance of Manston in terms of the economy of the area.
Do you share that disappointment?
Well, I mean, Kent County Council can make up their own mind where they are. I was a little surprised, I have to say, that Kent didn't recognise the importance of that. Maybe Kent were worried that they would be expected to step up the mark and start writing cheques, because if you look what's happened at Prestwick and at Cardiff, those have not been decisions made by those devolved administrations without cost. And therefore, I suspect Kent may have been concerned. I'm second-guessing what they may have been thinking. I didn't have conversations with Andrew Carter or any of the people at Kent, but my suspicion was that they didn't want to get themselves into a situation that they were writing cheques on behalf of their council taxpayers. Thanet, on the other hand, were very keen to engage, and with the compulsory purchase mechanism and the transfer to an investor who was keen to recommence operations, I was disappointed that they didn't go ahead with that, but they looked at the documentation and made that decision. We now have the documentation within the department, and as I say, we're considering what step we might take next to look at that. The review of the papers supplied to the department by Thanet District Council is one of a number of options which we're currently considering. So we have those papers in the department at the moment.
Could you give us any idea when you think a decision will be reached on this? I mean, are you saying today that you want to help to restore Manston to being operational as an airport, or that you know that you can deliver that?
Well, we can definitely help in terms of ensuring that any regulatory difficulties can be minimised, and I've made that clear right from the very start, working together with the CAA or any other problems there. But ultimately, it's down to a commercial operator being in a position to put together a case which can convince the local authority to carry out that particular process. As I say,
what about the owner of the airport? Who do you think owns the airport?
Well, at the moment, the airport has, I'm told, changed hands, but I think Mrs. Globe still has an interest in the airport.
Do you know who owns the airport?
Do we know who owns the airport?
Not absolutely clearly, no.
No, not absolutely clearly. I mean, I've heard the rumours that have been going around that it's been sold to...
Have you tried to find out?
No, I haven't had to try to find out who owns the airport, because, I mean, a compulsory purchase operation would not be dependent on who actually owned the airport. But it's certainly clear that whoever owns the airport at the moment does not see an option of recommencing aviation operations there. If I might just sort of just say a quick point about, I think there's been an awful lot of criticism levelled at Mrs. Globe in the way that she's conducted herself and her companies during this. I do not believe that Mrs. Globe bought the airport with a view to closing down operations and turning it into a development site. I take the view that
Why have you come? How have you come to that?
This is based on two conversations I've had with Mrs. Globe. She obviously bought the airport, and she's told me that in her view she could make a viable go of it, and that was predicated upon finding a low-cost carrier that would base its operations there. And we've seen from other airports around the country, having a low-cost carrier in there brings the passengers in, and many airports get not quite half their income, but a big share of their income from passengers coming through the door, using the shops, using the duty-free, the car parks, and all the other services there. So the business model that Mrs. Globe was proposing was to attract a low-cost operator to be based there, to increase passenger numbers, and for that to be viable. They were not successful in attracting a low-cost operator, and then I think the final nail in the coffin was when KLM pulled out, and then operations became unviable.
I listened a fortnight ago very carefully to Sir Roger's comments to this committee, and I don't think I would be over-interpreting to say that he wouldn't have agreed with that, because he told us that he'd had a commitment, I wouldn't remember, 1 month, and 2 months later, which was a very short period of time in the life of an airport. He was then told that the airport was closing, even though they'd been given, I think, notice that they would try to get airlines operating from there over the next 4 or 5 months. The actual closure happened within that period of time. So why, I presume you've read the transcript of this committee's hearings, why would you choose to believe this lady and not your colleague Sir Roger?
Well, I'm just recounting the conversation I had with Mrs. Globe, which...
but there's direct contradiction between that and your interpretation and the interpretation Sir Roger gave to this committee.
Well, she made it clear to me that her intention when she purchased the airport was to establish the airport as a successful airport, to build on the airlines and operations that were there already, and to attract a low-cost operator. And I was told by her that they had approached operators to be based at Manston, and they weren't successful. Now, I can only pass on what she said to me.
I think, Minister, it might be helpful for you to study the transcript of the meeting that we had, which in fact was the session which in fact we dedicated to Manston Airport because we thought it was important, and see the queries that were raised there to do with Mrs. Globe. But what I want to know now is exactly what is going to happen next, and you've told us, you've made it clear you want to see Manston operating as an airport again. You're telling us you're going to use powers, but apart from reference to the CAA, it seems rather unclear what those powers are. But could you just tell us clearly what is going to happen next, apart from your wish to see Manston operating as an airport?
Well, as I say, we last month, Thanet Council supplied the Department for Transport with the papers they considered in reaching their decision that River Oak were not a suitable indemnity party for the compulsory purchase process. and a review of the papers supplied to the department by Thanet Council is one of a number of options which is being considered.
And when would we know, or when would the people of the area know, if there was going to be an airport operating again at Manston?
Well, certainly we'll be looking at those papers over the next couple of weeks, and this is not something we can put off forever, because obviously it's important that if we do put something together to enable the case to be put. I mean, I'm not sure, I don't know if you've had evidence from Thanet Council as to the resources that they had to enable them to actually study the business case and the papers that were put before them.
Yes, we have. And it appears there was very little resource in relation to the problem.
Exactly. So one of the options before us would be to look at what resource could be put into looking at that, see if the business case does stack up. I mean, one of the options for River Oak would be to establish a freight operation. Now, it's interesting how the freight business in this country is developing. We see two big slices of the business being the belly cargo in the large long-distance airliners. Indeed, I was surprised to see the statistic that in terms of freight by value as opposed to volume, Heathrow Airport is bigger than the two next biggest ports, that's Felixstowe and Southampton put together. So we're seeing a lot of freight being concentrated on Heathrow and Gatwick, where we have the large 747s and A380s carrying cargo around the country. On the other hand, we have the parcel business, which because of the internet is dramatically increasing. And we have East Midlands Airport, for example, which is a big centre for cargo with DHL and UPS and others based around that part of the country. The business model, which I understand was being brought forward for Manston, was one based on perishable products brought in, some of which are coming in onto the continent and being shipped across either on ferries on the Channel Tunnel. And I think that's a business model which I'm neither qualified nor experienced to look at, but that was the business model that was brought forward, along with other...
That's correct, and that's what was discussed at the session that we had on this topic. I think what I'd like to just sort of finish with on this is a clearer picture of what is actually going to happen now. What degree of certainty could you give to stating that Manston will be operating as an airport?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
What degree of certainty could you give to Manston being operated as an airport again?
I'm very optimistic that something can be put together, but as I say, the detailed financial information that was put forward to Thanet Council has now been supplied to the department, and we're now in a position to consider what we should do with that. But certainly, we are well aware of the strength of feeling on the ground. As I say, it's unusual for an airport to have such widespread support. Usually, people are wanting the airport, night flights to be cut and operations to be curtailed, and when we do trials on different flight routes, we get thousands of letters of complaint. So, Manston is great from the point of view of an airport that has good local support. We're aware of the importance it has to the local economy in East Kent, and therefore we will leave no stone unturned. I think that was the words that my colleague, the Minister of State, used when he visited Manston. We will leave no stone unturned in terms of what we can do to facilitate operations being resumed there. And certainly now we have these documents in our possession, we're considering what we should do with those to enable us to move forward.
Mr Fitzpatrick.
Chair, thank you. Can we just clarify who's actually making the decision, Minister? You mentioned earlier on you're the Aviation Minister, but you hadn't had a chance to review all the papers, but that your Minister of State, John Hayes, had a chance to look. The Secretary of State was personally interested, the Prime Minister's personally interested. There's a DCLG dimension because it's Kent County Council and the local authorities have got a role. Who ultimately is going to make the decision that the Chair asked about as to Manston getting the green light or not within government?
Well, I think the first point I'd make is that the Prime Minister has taken a personal interest in Manston. There was a question in the House last year and the Prime Minister responded very positively. I wasn't available on the day when Mr Hayes went, so he went instead. He's the Minister of State, he's a senior minister in the department. The Secretary of State takes a keen interest. So I think all ministers in the department are taking an interest, as are number 10 Downing Street. So I don't think this matter could be considered at a much higher level. And as you know, having been a minister in government, it's you know, if number 10 says something will happen, it will happen.
So does that mean, are you saying then that this will happen?
No, I'm saying that I think you're reading. What I'm saying is that ministers at all levels, right up to the Prime Minister, are taking a personal interest in development and ensuring that what can be done will be done to try and ensure
but will
that
it happen? I understand your intention, I understand the strength of feeling about this, but will it happen? That really is what I'm asking you, because I'm not clear that the government, in fact, has sufficient powers to make it happen, unless you were going to buy this airport and do it yourself, which I suggest isn't going to happen.
We are, as I say, looking at the documentation. I mean, nobody would thank us for backing a rescue package which were to run into the sand very quickly and in hindsight be seen as a bad decision. So that's why we need to review these documents. Thanet Council themselves, with I think the limited expertise and resources available to them, decided not to go ahead with the compulsory purchase. I think now we have the documentation ourselves. The next step is for us to decide in the department where we should go with that, and we are, as I say, working to come forward with some proposals there. But, you know, can I reassure the people who are supporters of Manston Airport, not least my colleagues Laura Sand and Sir Roger Gale, that we are determined to do whatever we can to rescue this particular business, which I know is close to the hearts of many people in that part of the world.
Well, you've made that. I think Mr. Stringham's had a final question. Or
well, they should be very quick. I am still not clear, having listened to your answers, what powers you might have used or could use to keep Manston going. I'd be grateful if you could write to us as a committee on that, if you would. There's no point sort of pursuing that further now. And secondly, what worries me in the answers you've given, Minister, is that you've effectively said you want to talk to all the stakeholders and keep this airport going, but you don't know who owns it. How can you sit people round a table to get at all the interested parties if you're not sure of who owns it?
Well, I think it's quite clear that the current owners have long given up any ambitions to use the site as an airport. So in some
who
ways,
are the current owners?
Well,
you see the point we're making.
Well, wait a minute, I just
if you're not sure who they are,
Mr.
how can
Stringer,
you be
just
sure
a
about
moment,
that?
a minute. Who are the current owners?
Well,
Do you know?
certainly Mrs. Globe still retains an interest, and I'm not sure to what degree that is. Maybe we'll certainly be interested if you could find out who the
Well, we do
current
have
owners
some
are.
information which we relayed on another occasion, but it's
Okay.
we'll leave that now, Mr. Stringer.
But in some ways, there is no proposal from whoever the current owners are that they're keen to resume aviation. It seems that the current owners, whoever they are, seem to be more interested in the development of the site than actually restoring the aviation there. The only people that I'm aware of who are keen to restore aviation are River Oak, who came forward with a proposal. There was a mechanism which could have been put in place by the council, which was the compulsory purchase mechanism, and the council disappointed many people by not going ahead with that. We now have the documentation that was made available to the council, and we're considering what to do with that.
Right, thank you. Okay. Right. I now want to turn to the issue of public service obligations, maintaining air routes that would otherwise be lost. The department has been involved in establishing 2 public service obligations to restore the air links between Dundee and London Stansted and between Newquay and London Gatwick. How did you decide that which route should attract this subsidy and which route shouldn't?
Well, bids were put forward which we considered, and certainly in the case of the Newquay one, we were very keen to try and facilitate that because following the bad weather we had last winter and the problems with the rail link through Dawlish in particular, that underlined the importance of the Newquay-Gatwick connection for the economy of the southwest, and indeed, you know, Newquay provided that air bridge during that period, so it's been very successful. And on the 3 rotations a day from Newquay, the reports I get is that passenger numbers are encouraging, that people are using that service, and I think that is a good use of taxpayers' money in supporting that particular one. Similarly, the Dundee flight, we are, whilst the passenger numbers are maybe not quite as good, it is an important service connecting that part of the country with the capital. I think Mr Smith wants to come in.
Yes, I just wanted to add
Yes,
that these are the only 2 routes which we received bids for that met the criteria to receive the PSO funding. So
Are you concerned that public service obligations with the subsidy involved can distort competition?
I think it's important that the outlying parts of our country are not disadvantaged more than they already are by their geographical location. And certainly if we want to bring investment into the southwest, which has some issues in terms of employment and deprivation to an extent, it's important that we can ensure they have that good connection. And of course, as we're seeing numbers, particularly on the Newquay route, increase, with any luck, we'll move to a situation when these services are sustainable without. But the additional support that we gave Flybe in this case to operate that, I think has been very good news. It's been successful, and certainly I believe we can justify using taxpayers' money in this way to ensure that the benefits of the economic upturn, which are being felt very much in the London and the south east of the country, can be extended to other parts of the country, which have been a little bit slower, maybe catching up with the rest of us. So I think it's good news for business, it's good news for tourism in particular, and I'm very pleased that the Newquay service is being so successful. And the Dundee service is actually doing what it says on the can. It's enabling that part of the country to have a good connection with the capital.
They're being applied now to new routes, aren't they? The PSOs.
Yeah. Well, there's the connectivity fund, which is the existing routes. The PSO is for the new routes, and we're currently going through a process and requesting bids for those. It's interesting that some airports, like for example Newcastle, have got a Dubai flight without the need for a subsidy. So we would certainly keen to see more routes going into our smaller regional airports. Some of them may not need help to do that particular thing.
And will the smaller airports be able to use the Regional Air Connectivity Fund? Is that permitted?
Yes, the connectivity fund, it's for airports with under 3 million passengers. There is also provision...
What about 3 to 5 million, between 3 and 5
Between
million?
3 and 5 million pounds, there is we'd need to get the Commission to agree to those, but certainly I think that I've no particular worries that some of the airports like Newcastle, which fall into the higher category, we would not be able to make a good, strong case to the Commission. These would be genuine new routes. We would not be looking at churning. We'd not be looking at coming up with sort of underhand ways, maybe, of just channeling support into some regional airports, which I know some of our continental neighbours have occasionally been accused of doing. So these would be genuine support for new routes. The current rules are under 3 million, then it's within the rules between 3 and 5 million. There is some discretion, and we would have to approach the Commission to ensure that was okay.
How is a duly substantiated exceptional case identified? What does it mean? That's the criteria the Commission is saying for airports between 3 and 5 million pounds to be able to make use of this facility.
I'll ask Mr. Smith.
Is there a definition of that?
It's not been. There is no definition. It's not been tested yet. These are new regulations that the European Commission came out with last year. So, in cases where we have airports that have between 3 and 5 million passengers who wish to come forward and make a bid in this process, we would need to discuss that closely with the European Commission to understand exactly how they're going to apply the words that you've read out.
The first round of applications for the fund finishes on Wednesday, doesn't it? Can you give us any idea of how many applications have been?
I'm not sure we can. I'm not sure we can at the moment as to how many have been submitted at this stage. No.
Okay. Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Is there a time frame for the duration of public service obligations? Is it set in stone that it lasts for 12 months or 2 years or 5 years? What's the review period for these? Especially, Minister, given your comment about the problem with the rail link to Newquay last year, it was really critical. Is that going to be in existence open-endedly, or is there a review period?
There is an annual review period in the money that we give to support public service obligation flights, and individual cases are assessed on a case-by-case basis. So, for example, on the Dundee to London Stansted route, we've agreed to provide PSO funding to support that route for 2 years, and on the Newquay to London Gatwick route, we've agreed to provide funding for 4 years. So there are reviews, regular reviews during that process, but the actual time length for support is done on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you.
The Airports Commission will be reporting after the general election. Will enhanced capacity at either Heathrow or at Gatwick necessarily result in more links with airports in the regions? Will there be more slots available?
Well, obviously, allocation of slots at EU airports is governed by European Union and associated UK slot regulations. Under these regulations, the actual process of slot allocation at Heathrow and other slot coordinated airports in the UK is undertaken by an independent slot coordinator entirely separately from the government, the CAA or other interested parties. Therefore, the UK government plays no part in it. However, whether the option is Heathrow or one of the two options at Heathrow or Gatwick, there will be the creation of additional slots. And of course, at the present time, one of the big frustrations, I think, of smaller regional airports is that they can't get their passengers into Heathrow or Gatwick to go on to further flights, which is why, of course, we have this situation that Schiphol, Brussels and Paris-Charles de Gaulle are taking up some of the slack. I know in terms of my own regional airport, Leeds Bradford, they were delighted when they restored the connection into Heathrow. And indeed, I know British Airways view that as part, not just as a standalone service, but a service that links passengers in to other longer distance flights. And they see the economics of doing that linked to some of those more expensive tickets that they're selling. And indeed, I flew down from Leeds Bradford to Heathrow about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and the flight was delayed, and it was interesting to see the British Airways staff with boards holding up the destinations to which those connecting people had to be quickly taken. And it was amazing how many different places in America and India and elsewhere, Australia, the people on that flight were going. So I think it is, which will be an opportunity were we to create these new slots at Heathrow or Gatwick, that we can see more regional airports being connected in.
But are you seriously saying that the government has no role at all to play in ensuring that happens?
No, this is an independent process, and the government does not have...
So the government has no say, so are you really saying that the government will be doing literally nothing?
Well, it's an independent process. The slots are allocated. I think many people would be very disturbed if politicians and government got involved in that system. The mechanism is set up in a way that can be seen as fair. Of course, anyone who feels it isn't fair can always challenge that, and there's judicial reviews and other processes like that. But of course, if we do move forward with new capacity in the southeast, that will create additional slots which will enable some regional airports to take advantage of those. Of course, in the longer term, with the advent of High Speed 2, I think if we look at countries like Germany in particular, or Spain, the demand for short-haul flights within a country where there is a high-speed rail connection as well tends to go down. So, taking a flight from Leeds, Bradford to Heathrow would not be something that you would do in a country like Germany where there is a high-speed rail connection. And therefore, I believe when High Speed 2 is on the go, particularly with the connection through to Heathrow either via Crossrail on Phase 1 or using the spur, which is currently part of Phase 2, there will be, I think, good opportunities for people in areas where previously they'd seen air connectivity as a way of getting through to a London hub, as being high speed being an alternative for that. So I think it'll be interesting to see. And of course, there'll be environmental benefits attached to that, and that will free up additional slots as well.
Do you think it's important there is a link from the regions to either Gatwick or Heathrow, rather than to a hub outside of this country? Does it matter?
Well, certainly, speaking to my local enterprise partnership in North Yorkshire, they see when they got the restoration of the link into Heathrow, they saw that as a massive improvement in connectivity for
But to the government,
the region.
does it matter to the department that there are links to a hub in the UK rather than links from the regions to a hub outside of the UK?
Well, I think where there is a demand for a service, then that demand will be met by the operators. And as I say, we've seen some regional airports operate using Schiphol as their hub. You know, if you go to Durham Tees Valley, for example, they have a Schiphol flight, and so people will make journeys using Schiphol as their hub in the same way that people using Leeds Bradford can either go to Schiphol, Brussels, Paris or Heathrow. And I think that creates a vibrant market, and that's what has meant that people get such good value in terms of air travel in the UK. We've seen prices come down year on year. We've seen more destinations being served. We've got a very vibrant and enterprising aviation sector, and that is down to the free market, not down to regulation. So I think that it's important that where we have enterprising airlines, enterprising airports, that they respond to demand. They put on those new routes. I mentioned the Newcastle to Dubai route, which has been put on without a subsidy. I think there's a Manchester to Newark, New Jersey service. There's, these have been put on by airlines seeking to benefit from increased wishes for people to fly and the improvements that we've seen in the UK economy. And I think for politicians to interfere in that market that is already providing better value, more destinations and much better services at our airports. I mean, all the airports I go to around the country are always keen to show me their new facilities, their new catering facilities.
But does that mean that you would see any attempt to assist an airport to have a link to a hub in the UK, whether it be to do with Heathrow or Gatwick, is something you'd regard as interfering in the market?
Well, we have the PSO obligation, which is, yes, it is by definition an interference in the market. But a case has been made, in the case of Dundee and Newquay, that because of the geographical location of that part of the country, the disadvantage that gives them, that we can actually distort the market by skewing it a bit in their favour. And I make no apologies at all, in the same way that, in parts of the country where we have high levels of unemployment, we make economic steps to help people. We give money to local enterprise partnerships and local authorities to do that. I think it's important that within the country we do seek to try and address those imbalances. But by and large, the market is delivering a fantastic service. We've seen airlines spring up from nowhere. In the case of Leeds Bradford, Jet2 that nobody had heard of a few years ago is now the major operator from that airport. EasyJet in the case of Luton, I know it's one of the small airports, but we've seen tremendous enterprise and innovation. We've seen new aircraft being purchased, cleaner aircraft, quieter aircraft. I think it is a very good story to be told, and the smaller regional airports have played their part where there is a shortage of slots at the big hub airports, particularly the shortage of slots at important times of day.
But I'm asking you about desirability of UK hub airport links, not things more general. Mr. Stringer.
That was just the question I was going to ask, Chair. It may all be all very well that Newcastle, to take an example, uses Schiphol as a hub, but we're effectively exporting jobs, aren't we? Jobs in Schiphol are not as important to me as jobs in this country. Do you differentiate between jobs in Holland and jobs in the UK in terms of your responsibilities?
Heathrow Airport is 99% full. There are no slots at Heathrow Airport. Gatwick Airport is 85% full. There are no slots at the important times of day. So the reason, there are two reasons why...
I do understand that, but the train of the Chair's questioning was if slots became available after the Davis report and the possible expansion of Heathrow or Gatwick, was it important to you as a Minister of the United Kingdom government that regional airports could get into Heathrow and or Gatwick? And you seem to be saying no, that it's just as useful to have a hub in Schiphol or Copenhagen or Frankfurt or Charles de Gaulle as it is in this country.
It's in the interests of people like British Airways and Virgin Atlantic to get those passengers into their hub. The problem at the moment is
where's the interest of the British government in jobs in this country?
Well, confident that the airlines based in our UK major airports will see the opportunity of increased slots being made available to get those passengers which are currently going to Schiphol and Charles de Gaulle or Frankfurt or Brussels into airports in the London area. And I think they will rise to that challenge. And as I say, one of the big difficulties is that we have no slots at Heathrow. That's why we were so delighted that Leeds Bradford got that slot into Heathrow, because there was plenty of other opportunities that could have been used there, and British Airways took that decision because they knew that those passengers coming down from a regional airport were flying on with possibly business class tickets, long haul tickets, lucrative routes which they're losing out on because you can't get down from the north into the hubs from certain places because there are no connecting flights. So I think it's very important that if we do get a decision following the Davis Commission report, that the airlines in the UK will seek those opportunities and be able to capitalise on that. And I have every confidence that in the same way that KLM have seen the advantage of a combination of no slots at Heathrow and APD to funnel those passengers from the outlying parts of the UK into Schiphol, that the airlines based in our main London airports will see a similar advantage in being able to do that.
Can I ask you a question the other way around? Assuming Davis recommends extra runway capacity at Heathrow Gatwick, has the Department of Transport considered what implications that might have for, say, the route you mentioned previously, the Dubai-Newcastle route, that if there are extra slots in the London system, what analysis have you done of the potential impact of that on our regional airports?
Well, I think we're at an interesting time in terms of the aircraft that airlines are choosing to purchase. At one point, everybody assumed that all the passengers would be flying on A380s and 747s from big hubs to other big hubs and then connecting on from there. And actually, we've seen disappointing order books for A380s. I think it's early days yet for the A380s. I think there's more to come in terms of that. But we're seeing other airlines using aircraft such as the Dreamliner and the Airbus equivalent, or indeed using Embraer and Bombardier aircraft, which are smaller aircraft, flying out, for example, from London City, which can not only fly more regularly because they're smaller planes, but also can fit in with businessmen's particular plans. So we're seeing things moving in all different directions at once. And because we've got these smaller planes, that because they're efficient, they can fly small numbers of passengers that previously would not have been viable to fly transatlantic, can be flying out from places like London City. And I see that the regional airports also being able to join in that particular change in the industry. So I think we're seeing tremendous, I don't think we've ever seen as much diversity and innovation in different types of services, different types of operations. And I think, because we've now got these aircraft, there's no reason why that these flights shouldn't continue from our regional airports, which it's not all going to go down to Heathrow, because a lot of these passengers start in the north of England, and the last thing they want to do is to go down to Heathrow in many ways.
Yeah, we can agree that aviation is an industry that's changed. It has changed very quickly and is changing very quickly, and it's very difficult to predict. But so I was asking you the question: have you considered what impact expansion of runway capacity, particularly hub runway capacity in the southeast, would have on the regional airports? Has the department done that study?
Well, I've not seen detailed analysis. I know the Davis Commission is looking at aviation in general, and they're looking at.
But has the department looked at this? That was the question.
Well, certainly, I've not seen a detailed analysis of how that would impact. I think a lot of that would depend. That would depend on a little bit on what decisions were made following the Davis Commission.
So at the moment, you're saying then at the moment the department hasn't looked itself at this issue.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Not in recent times, and as the Minister said, we will need to do that in light of the Airports Commission's final report.
In light of that, at the moment you haven't. Mr Vickers.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still not quite certain, Minister, although my colleagues have tried to tease out from you what the government's position is on this. If I can relate the argument to my own airport in my constituency, Humberside,
I know it well,
which has daily flights to Schiphol and no flights to London. So therefore Schiphol is in effect the hub airport. Bearing in mind the government have done a great deal to promote and advance renewable energy in my constituency, which means that there is a greater demand for connections to other parts of the world. And the government has acknowledged that economic development is a key part of improving transport connections of all kinds. Would the government actually like to see connections from Humberside, just as other airports, to London? Do you think that would aid economic development?
Yes, I believe it would. I'd also like to see more point-to-point from regional airports, because if you're connecting on somewhere, if you're wanting to go to the United States, then most passengers would prefer a point-to-point from a regional airport, or a large regional airport like Manchester, for example, than having to go down to London. There's also, I think, an issue which I'd like to see more airlines looking more through ticketing in terms of rail connectivity, because at the moment, if I was taking a flight from Heathrow to the States and took the train down to Heathrow and my train was delayed, it would be my problem. If I took the flight from Leeds Bradford, then it would be British Airways' problem. So I think that we could get better use of some of these particular routes if we could see a little bit more joined up thinking between rail operators and airlines to enable people to buy their whole journey. At the moment, certainly if I'm going further afield from Heathrow, I'd either want to go down the night before to be sure of being there, or get a connecting flight so that British Airways have the responsibility for the entire journey. But with the aircraft which we're now seeing being made available, and with the possibility of new slots at either Gatwick or Heathrow, then I believe there is tremendous opportunity for smaller regional airports to develop more point-to-point or get more feeder flights into the hub airports.
The only problem with Humberside is it has no rail connections to London.
Yes, well...
Thanks to the rail regulators spending years deciding whether slots are available.
Mm. Well, Doncaster Robin Hood has a similar problem, despite the fact the East Coast Main Line goes right past the perimeter. And when HS2 is in operation, of course, we will be freeing up more capacity on the existing rail network, so that might open up other opportunities for better connectivity. But the one message I get from the smaller regional airports when I go to see them is that we need better connectivity, whether that be rail connections, improved roads. We've done some work at Doncaster Robin Hood. We're looking at doing some work at Leeds Bradford. Or indeed airports that do have good connectivity like Newcastle, where the metro goes straight from Newcastle Central Station into that airport. They seem to be the important factors that will, I think, drive airports forward. Other airports that don't have such good connectivity, I'm thinking particularly about Durham Tees Valley, and maybe Manston, where that has often held those back, and that's why we need to work together with the airports to see what can be done. If this is an improvement that only benefits the airport, I don't think it's unfair to say to the airport, you should carry the lion's share of the investment. If it's an investment that benefits the wider economic area and the wider population, then I think the taxpayer has a part to play, and that's why we're looking closely at what we can do in terms of road connections at Leeds Bradford, which is notoriously difficult, particularly in the winter time.
Mr Fitzpatrick.
Can I just go back to the point the Minister made that the free market is the deciding factor in determining aviation policy? Because quite clearly, when the coalition came to power, it made a decision there would be no expansion of capacity in the South East. 3 years later, it established the Smith Commission to say, let's look at the question of aviation capacity in the South East. I think it's fair to say the Conservative Party now recognise there is an issue. The Lib Dems are still in denial. But the decision to establish the Smith Commission was a government decision, a political decision, and it will be a government determination of what follows on from the Smith Commission's conclusions. And whatever determination is made, whether it's Heathrow and Gatwick, or Heathrow or Gatwick, that will have an impact on regional airports and smaller airports. And the second point I wanted to make was, in terms of the free market, the route for HS2 is a highly political question. The spur into Heathrow was keenly debated in the Chamber of the Commons, and as a political determination to link up Heathrow with the rest of HS2, which gives it a clear advantage over Gatwick, despite the fact, as you said, it's 99% full. So what it's going to do with all those extra people who want to use it is another question, which seems to suggest that the Commission, the Davis Commission, sorry, not the Smith Commission, will conclude in that direction. But these are political questions. And in terms of all the questions we were asking earlier about the government's role over Manston and whether the government had enough powers to intervene, your responses, no disrespect, because you know I have high regard for you, Minister, your responses were very defensive and very negative, and we don't know still what the government's attitude is to Manston or what the government attitude will be to the bigger questions, because your philosophy at the moment seems to be the free market will decide and government doesn't have a role to play.
Well, certainly government has a role to play in terms of the big strategic decisions. It's a little bit like, Network Rail and the operators. The government controls the network, but we have a free market in terms of the way franchises are linked and competition involved there. And we've seen in the UK a very, very vibrant and successful aviation sector in the private sector and airport sector, by and large, in the private sector. And that's where I see the future lying. And that's why I think any solution at Manston, which I hope there will be a long-term solution, must involve a commercial operator making that operation pay, not some sort of long-term subsidy situation, which in many other European Union countries would have been their knee-jerk reaction. I think we've seen how that's failed in many parts of Europe. And the model that we've seen being successful in the UK is a model that I believe would fit very well in a place like Manston, with an operator actually addressing a real market demand, and River Oak have identified a particular sector of the freight market, they've identified other operations in terms of general aviation and recycling of aircraft. So there is a market there that River Oak want to tap into, and therefore if that case can be made, I think that is a way forward. And who knows, if that operation can be made to stack up, then we could see the return of other types of passenger operation as well. So I think the market has been tremendously successful in terms of the aviation sector in this country, and I don't think that's a model that we should move away from. Yes, government has a part to play, an overall strategic route, an overall strategic role, but I still believe whatever structures are in place, whatever happens at Heathrow or Gatwick, it will be a commercial operator operating those services, and it will be commercial airlines delivering their passengers to their destinations and providing the services that they need.
Right, well, on that note, I think we will conclude. Thank you very much,
you.
Minister. Thank you.